All right. I believe we are live. Welcome, everybody, to another recording session of the Annex live on YouTube. I'm Joseph Cohen from the City University of New York. I'm here first with Daniel Morrison, Abilene Christian University in Abilene, Texas. Dan?
Hey, good to see you, Joe. Good to see you, Charles.
And Charles J. Gomez, quantitative mathematical sociologist extraordinaire from the University of Arizona. Nice to see you, Charlie.
Nice to
Charles?
see you too. Nice to see you too, Dan. I appreciate the emphasis on the J. Good to distinguish yourself.
Yeah, right. Well, I imagine you have
Very
the same.
important for citations.
It is. It is. There are a lot of Charles Gomez's. There are a lot of Charlie Gomez's. A lot of actors. A lot of people with sort of illustrious background. So it's good to kind of like protect your brand.
And then there's Charles J. Gomez of the University of Arizona.
Then there's me.
Famous in a different way.
I think we all three of us probably have that generic name problem, like that problem where like there's 100 people named after you. Like Joseph Cohen is like the John Smith of Jews. It's like anyhow, thank you very.
I really don't want to have a very famous. I want to share a name with a really famous person. You know what I mean? That's tough.
Yeah. I always think of that Seinfeld episode with Joel Rifkin. Do you guys remember that? Am I dating myself? It could go either way. It could really go badly too. Like think of everybody who was named Adolf in 19 like you're like And on that note, thank you everybody for joining us for another episode of the Annex. This is just like a low-key banter, ask me anything kind of session. We're basically playing with live streaming, trying to figure out how it works, trying to figure out how we can, create a Discord or like a discussion generating community building type of thing here on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us. It looks like we have a single concurrent viewer, which might be Conrad. I don't know if that's you, Conrad. We had a couple, but we lost them right off the bat. So something to contemplate with the analytics. So whoever's out there, just introduce yourself. There's nobody on, and we're just messing around here. This is the second live stream. I really enjoyed the first one. I thought you guys were very, very funny. And just so you know, truth in advertising, I was planning on broadcasting the audio version of the Beth Berman interview on the live stream, but then I realized it was like just a colossal logistic thing where I'd have to be standing here for the whole interview. So instead, I've just released it. It is on the stream. It is on the podcast stream now, and a version of it will be available on made available on YouTube. And look, Eric Schwartz is here. Another show alumnus. Hey, Eric, it's good to see you. We're just messing around here on the live stream. We're going to banter. So if you want to, first of all, you should come on the show and join us. But if you got something to add, just let us know in the chat stream. See, this is super cool. Anyhow, how are you guys doing? Everything going well on your end? Should we jump right into it?
Let's jump right in, Joe.
All right, wait, before I do, public service announcement. I wanted to show you guys this. Public service announcement to anybody who is into rap music and memorabilia. If you go on the New York City is auctioning a bunch of gifts that were given to mayors, and you can get like a Nike sneakers that were autographed
Air Force Ones,
right?
No way.
Autographed by Ice-T and Fab Five Freddy. Check it out. $200. $200 is the asking price. It's not loading up, so I'm not going to bother. Just
that's it.
I see holiday shopping,
right?
For the Ice-T and Fast Freddy fan in your life,
right? I was like, wow, somebody's going to love this. So somebody in sociology, news you can use. It's already paying off. You're joining our live stream. Anyhow, let's get down to it. So we got two issues on tap to discuss, and then anything else that might come. The first one, let's talk about Twitter and the Twitter exodus, because Conrad posted a question earlier, and I was moved by this. This is what got me moving. Cynthia Miller Idris just posted. She's like, "I'm off Twitter. I'm done." I guess it was after the shooting of the nightclub, the LGBT nightclub out in Colorado, and she just couldn't take the animus, and she said, "That's it. I'm out. Sorry, I'll miss you, Twitter friends, but like, it's not something I want to do." And like, Twitter has been on death watch. And what are your takes? So Conrad is like, he's wondering, there's like a big sort going on. People are leaving Twitter, joining Mastodon. What's your take on this? First question for you. Are you leaving Twitter? And if so, why? If not, what's the plan? Let's start. Charlie, are you done with Twitter? What's your Twitter?
I'm actually very torn on this. To add another layer of complexity, I also have a Tesla. So that makes it even more sort of this like very first world conundrum, right? Very, very privileged conundrum. I'm right now holding on to Twitter. My reason being, I rather be there to be a pain. And also, to be clear, I'm not really much of a tweeter. I mostly just treat it as a LinkedIn, and I sort of reshare. But if the chips are down, I would rather be there to be, I don't know, to not necessarily give up the platform to sort of these more fringe right-wing kind of sort of influencers that will likely drown out the discourse in the not too distant future. I think it's important to kind of also just to stay your ground, to not necessarily just abdicate a lot of that agency away. And I did go to Mastodon. I did set up a profile, but it's really, really kind of janky. I don't know. That was just my experience. It's I don't think it's maybe ready yet. But I don't know. I mean, it's sort of like I'm watching this sort of week by week to see how this is actually going to play out in the end.
That's an interesting point that you make that I never thought of, though. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, "Oh, I'm going to punish Elon. We should all punish Elon for doing this." But in the process, it's true. We're like, if all of sociology scholarship abandons Twitter, then effectively we just give up that space for public debate. And there's still a lot of
I sort of like think it's sort of the same reason every 4 years when we have a presidential cycle, it's sort of the I'm moving to Canada kind of cry. And that actually bugs me a lot, because it's very privileged people who can say that, who actually have the means to do that, right? It's sort of just, if you really did sort of subscribe to these ideals of equity and justice, right, social justice, then you should be staying and helping those who don't have a voice, who increasingly will not have a voice, right? So I kind of like, I don't necessarily, I mean, there is a form of protest. I don't necessarily think like the moral lines are as clear in this case. And again, I'm also conflicted. I have a Tesla. I'm coming from a very privileged sort of background, so all those qualifiers holding. I always have kind of an issue of just sort of leaving a platform when it's sort of this abdication of it. Granted, Twitter platform does not make a country in the same way, so I also understand that too.
Dan, what do you think? What do you say?
Yeah, well, first of all, Charlie, that's so many interesting thoughts that you shared. I'm not leaving yet, but my activity has declined pretty precipitously, and really not necessarily because my personal feed has become filled with transphobia or racism or hate. And I think maybe that's because I use TweetDeck and I kind of have filters, and I have sort of columns that I check based on my levels of interest. But I also find Mastodon to be like I'm on Mastodon too. It's very different, as Charlie says, and it's much calmer. At least my experience so far. Like when I open Twitter, I kind of have the feeling like, am I going to encounter something that's going to turn my rage up or my anger level up? And there's a part of me that the doom scrolling like is really addictive in a certain way, or at least it's compelling. And Mastodon, I don't feel that way. In part, I think because of the way the different servers, I guess, are operating, or whatever they're called. And also I think there's less capacity for surprise on Mastodon, since you follow a list of people, and there's less of that algorithm feeding you things that you may or may not want, or that enrage you to engage you. to coin a phrase.
Yeah.
Right. And so I just feel like it's a lot. I feel calmer when I'm on
Yeah.
I think one of the things that might be is a potential sort of drawback in some ways to Mastodon the way it's organized now is just like there is that lack of serendipity. So you've got to go and like look at through hashtags and search and try to follow people who are not necessarily in your network. So I can sort of see it as a way of kind of building these little fiefdoms is not the right word, but sort of little enclosed communities. So you can imagine, Sociodon, the sociological Twitter moving to that space and becoming in some ways, I don't know, echo chamber is the right word, but becoming kind of a self-reinforcing community in a way that, that's less the case on Twitter. And then I think you're right, Charlie, in the sense of, because Mastodon is still a tiny, tiny fraction of what Twitter is, at least in the United States, you don't have the possibility of your stuff being picked up by people who are not in our guild.
Yeah.
Right. And so, this podcast to me is part of, broadly public sociology. Right. And we hope that we're being found by people who have curiosity about what sociologists think and what we're writing and what we're saying and the unique perspective that sociologists bring to the public sphere. And so if lots of sociologists abdicate that space, that does potentially have some negative consequences. And this is not to cast any aspersions on anyone who decides that it's too much for them. I think that's real and relevant, and you should take care of yourself. And I mean, I'm not in this place where Cynthia Miller Idris is, like, in her career, in her public visibility. I mean, that's a person who has who's written some really great stuff that I've used in my classes. And I'm sure is the target of specific kinds of attacks because of that. Right. And so I think, aside from the trans issue, which is a real issue and super important, many of us are differently positioned relative to both our topics and also just our identities.
Yeah. I also think I think of Conrad in particular, right? Like that guy's a big platform on Twitter. And I think it would be a loss for Conrad to abandon Twitter because he is a conduit for information related or perspectives related to our discipline to be diffusing through society. And it's for any scholar who has developed a platform, that's a professional asset to you. You're in the ideas business, and this is a line of communication. I don't change anything. I've always used a bunch of social media websites, and I just toggle through them. And I figure that my attention will naturally drift towards whatever suits me in the moment. I just sort of let my behavior sort of reveal my preferences to me. I will say something about what Dan said, though. When I was trying to come up with banter for the Annex episode, I had to turn the algorithm on Twitter to make it easy because the algorithm does sort of feed you discussion or controversy or clickbaity type of topics that are good. It's good for finding out what the zeitgeist is discussing. So it's kind of weird. Conrad writes, we could always go to ASA Connect.
I trust that was a wry joke.
Oh yeah, for sure. I'll
stick to Mastodon, thank you.
Totally. With ASA Connect, this is how I see it, right? It's I'm a public employee from the state of New York, and the state is paying me to come up with and distribute ideational content related to my expertise. And if I when I do anything on Twitter or whatever, I do feel like it is part of my job. I'm a local professor in Queens, and I'll post on whatever people in my community, whatever comes to me, and that's part of my job. And the ASA, I know it's a nonprofit, but there's just something that feels so not public service about everything that is involved. Mm-hmm. It's am I just going to take all my public time and dedicate it to a closed circle of people who can pay $400 or $500 a year to participate in their private conversations? It's just everything I don't like about the ASA in a nutshell is ASA Connect. What's your take on that, ASA Connect?
Joe, do you remember? So I used to be a CUNY. Do you remember when they rolled out CUNY first? And it was
Yeah.
sort of this multi-million-dollar thing that was supposed to integrate across all the college campuses. And it was supposed to be sort of this one ring to rule them all, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, from at least my last data point, it had failed across all sorts of different dimensions, or at least was on the struggle bus, right?
Yeah.
To get over the hill. And I think, I mean, I can see the focus groups of whatever consulting group that was sort of reached out to think of how do we better connect with our members and whatnot. Right? I can kind of see the focus groups. I can kind of see the PowerPoint deck that was used, and like you can kind of see the good intention that was behind it. And to be fair, it's really easy from the peanut gallery to kind of snicker, right? These things are not hard, especially when you have dwindling enrollment, dwindling enrollment as a major across the country and dwindling membership decline, right? It's hard to imagine coming up with some kind of sort of unified platform, and considering how our inboxes are always inundated, always filled with junk and things that we need to have been that were due like yesterday, right? Yeah. So I empathize in that regard, but man, it's and who time will tell, right? Because you could imagine that maybe this thing will actually get picked up, but it does seem you can always tell on Twitter, right? Go back to Dan, your point, the serendipity and sort of just how easy it is to just diffuse information. Just the reaction to everyone of the sociological intelligentsia to the platform. So time will tell, but I mean, it's not looking too good right now.
Dan, ASA Connect.
Well, I haven't found a great deal of utility in it yet. I do think it's super interesting to think about, as Charlie was saying, like what's the pitch for this? And the argument seems to be, hey, let's sort of have a walled garden, let's circle the wagons a little bit, let's build community amongst ourselves. When the alternative strategy is actually let's open up the doors wider, let's share our ideas even more extensively, let's continue to reach out to interested publics through podcasting. And I know there's some of this that's happening with various articles like in AASR and so forth, and other ASA sponsored journals. But there really is a conflict, I think, between sort of the Phil Cohens of the world and the Joe Cohens of the world, and the ASA staff and executive leadership when it comes to this. I don't have the answer. I worry that maybe ASA Connect becomes just an insular thing for section announcements for I have a new book coming out or something like that, which in some ways would be great. I would like to know what's happening in the field, but also I want it to go beyond our little garden here. I mean, the joy of sociology for me, like on a daily basis, is helping students have those aha moments where things that were not clear, you give them a new concept and they're like, whoa, that's the thing I needed to make sense. That's the idea I needed to make sense of this experience that I had, or that's the thing I needed to unlock the some of the reasons why I see these problems that I see in the world. And when you're only talking to a specialist, you lose that.
My interpretation of it is that they purchased a WordPress theme set and plugin set. The principal like the design choices that they made were designed to lock members into closed door discussions so that they would feel that they had to buy a membership to be conversant with their colleagues. It is my understanding of the technology they're using, because it's coming up in my own research, because it's very similar, is that like they could have easily designed it to facilitate our own efforts to engage in public dialogue, get our ideas out there, but all the design choices that they made were designed to lock us, who are the true audience, into memberships. And it's such a typical marketing way of doing it, because marketers understand the tools of passing along information, but they have no clue of the content, right? They don't understand like what would be fruitful exchange for us or how to do our job well. What they know is that there's some generic technologies that you can use. And like That's all that was. It was made with like no eye towards helping sociologists do sociology, in my opinion. It's just a big ass effort to lock us in to a very expensive membership. And Conrad writes like maybe ASA membership should be like Planet Fitness, so cheap you won't be bothered if you're not getting any value from it. That's my understanding of how they do it in economics. The Economics Association. My understanding is it operates outside of a business park in Memphis, Tennessee, as opposed to us who have like, we're on like, Washington, D.C. within steps from Congress so that we can, I don't know what, lobby government and get the primo people in the nonprofit admin sector. Like that's where our money's going, is to all of these things. Like, you don't even need an office.
It's not without some tinge of irony that it's the economists, right? So I think of like, Pop Behrman's work, right? Who are sort of ruling the sort of public administration, right? Yet their headquarters are it's nowhere. It's not even in DC. Whereas us, who've sort of been relegated to the periphery, we at least have like the clubhouse next to DC, except that we're just never allowed to come in, right? So, it is not without some sense of irony.
I am not native to this. Like, obviously, I'm a sociologist and I've been for like now 20 years. But like, I came from outside the discipline, and my opinion or my impression when I first met sociologists is that they were absolutely obsessed with prestige and social class and making sure that they felt like they were, cuddled up to the elites, even while they decried them. I think that a lot of our business is sustained by like, I don't know, just mixing with rich people and trying to get rich people. And like, there's just an obsession with it. And the economists, it's totally an economist move. An economist would be like, well, let's, why don't we just have a business office in suburban Memphis because it's more efficient than like being in downtown DC. That's such an economist.
You're reminding me my membership is due, and I'm getting increasingly, how should we say, aggressive emails from SA. Just giving me a friendly reminder that my membership is going to lapse at the end of December, and if I don't have the membership by January 1st, I guess something bad will happen.
It's honest. And I'm surprised. I mean, I don't know, maybe because I went from grad student to early career professor, but I feel like I'm paying Equinox prices for Planet Hollywood quality, for Planet Fitness quality. Like, where am I like spas and whatnot? It's like the jump was pretty precipitous.
Yeah, it's really complicated because, like, on one hand, when you're a professor, you realize you're like a little bit of a steward of the discipline. It's like not a very big community, and you're kind of responsible for the discipline's continuity, and you want to be a team player and all of that. On the other hand, like, man, when I look at some things the ASA does, I don't really feel like it's for sociology. I feel like it's for the organization, which is often what happens with nonprofits, right? The mission starts shifting around towards like just helping the organization itself. And then you wonder, well, should I take a stand like Philip Cohen has and been like, no, I'm not putting my money into this because I don't like how it's being run. It's a complicated question that we all wrestle with. Does anybody, Conrad, or anybody who's in the chat window there, any final views on ASA membership, Connect? Oh, Conrad wanted to ask, what do you think about this? Like, if there is some sorting, do you think that's good or bad for sociology? I think it'd be bad for sociology if we reduce, like, if all sociologists leave Twitter, then all of sociology will lose access to a large market. And I've been swayed by the opinion of Charlie. Like, I don't think that's a good thing for us, especially because like we're in the ideas business. Like, that's what we do. Why would you cut yourself off from a market? Any contrasting views, conflicting views with that? Or
I don't also see how like the broader intelligentsia are going to leave en masse. So you think of sort of like the Washington Post opinion editors, other prominent figures in other disciplines. Like I don't necessarily, I mean, that's not to say that it won't happen, but I don't necessarily see that. And I think like by sort of siphoning us off, there may be more harm done than good. Albeit, the controversies are again, as you were saying before. I mean, it's also like if you are in a position where you are actively feeling threatened by comments made by people who are unbanned, yeah, I mean, that's a completely different conversation, and I can't imagine what that's like, but it seems like there's not really any good choices here.
I mean, look, everyone wants sociologists' opinions on the newest outrageous Ross Douthat or Brett Stevens article, okay? And so if I don't have Twitter, who do I know how to be mad for that day? And as we know, rage writing is really my jam. It's basically, how am I motivated to write? Well, I'm tenured. I have lots of things I want to say. How do I really get in front of the keyboard, though? Rage.
Rage, yeah. There is something to be said for that, though. It is.
Yeah, I think they've done a study that's shown that over, I think at least since the early 2000s, they've done like some kind of engram analysis, right? So looking at like different tokens and words, that if you look at sort of by emotion, anger, outrage has increased exponentially over time, and largely because as the move towards like new media, social media, it just drives more clicks, and that's how these like old media sort of, you know, the sort of the old guards of like the Washington Post, New York Times, all that stuff, that's how they just stay in business. That's how they need to stay in business.
Well, God bless those New York Times columnists. Keep doing the Lord's work.
You know what Mastodon does feel a little bit like, though, and it's a good thing, because like I do take in earnest the arguments that like the algorithms are messing with our thinking and messing with our worldview and always being stimulated. But like, I remember when I was a young man, I used to smoke, and I remember trying to quit by getting cigarettes with no nicotine in them. You know, and you just smoke them, and you're like, there's nothing here. And it's like Mastodon is a little bit like that. It looks like Twitter, but I'm not being tweaked into rage or panic on a constant basis. And it's probably better for me. But like the emotional contrast is very striking for me, you know.
It's like those chips.
I feel about 40% calmer on a daily basis, for real.
I know. It's not even a joke. But you do you feel like you're like, man, I'm not getting my emotional hit? Like you're like, actually. I know.
Yeah. You're gonna have to get those patches.
I don't know.
Rage patch.
Maybe I'm just, you know, maybe I've been habituated to that, right? So it's sort of like I'm detoxing, to use the metaphor, right? And, you know, it actually is better for me. It's, first of all, it's better probably to not smoke a lot, right? It's better to have other kinds of vices that have health effects, and maybe our emotional health and our addiction to rage or outrage is also problematic, you know.
Yeah. All right. So should we move on? Is anybody?
Let's move on. Yeah.
Enough about my emotional life. Let's talk about.
All right. So the second story that I wanted to talk about, let's see if I can work my Stream Deck properly. All right. So in the New York Times, there was recently a story about how colleges are signing marketing deals with online gambling companies like, FanDuel or whatever betting. I don't know who's who, but you get the idea. And in some cases, they're like sending advertisements or like partner codes to their own students with they're like, yeah, you can get $100 in free gambling when you use the code, like, I don't know, Michigan State University, whatever they are. And
that's smart.
It's smart. There we go. But like, really, what you have is you have companies that are marketing online gambling. You have universities marketing online gambling to their students. Some of them aren't even 21. What's your did you read this story? Have you guys seen this story?
I had heard of it. I just didn't. I was afraid to read it just because I was waiting to see University of Arizona pop up in there. Even more conflicted. That's wild. That's right.
I hadn't seen it. It is incredibly. It is wild. I mean, how many ways can universities turn their students into profit centers?
Well,
I mean,
That-
and partnerships, right? Not only with obviously sports books, but also, private residence hall contracts, right? Um, you know, um, private, like Chartwells and other kinds of, not to single them out, but Chartwells and other food service providers, bookstore collaborations. I mean, I went to a public university for undergrad in my first graduate degree, and they ran their own dining services and they ran their own bookstore. And that's unusual these days, right? Those things are usually outsourced. And what that does, of course, is it limits the kinds of protections that you get as a you often get anyway, maybe less so today than maybe in previous eras, as being a member of a public university, a public entity, a state entity. Anyway, that's a side point, but this is like, first of all, campus athletic workers have a bunch of issues already. And with unruly fans. I mean, there was just that brawl, I guess, that took place in a football stadium recently. Some fans were accosting a player or something like that.
Oh, really?
To add gambling to this, and there's already enough money sloshing through college football, particularly, but not only. I just think it's not good. It's bad.
In a nutshell. I did my undergraduate in the 1990s. It was like the neoliberalism heyday. And I remember when they first introduced commercial advertising, they allowed it on campus grounds. I went to Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. And I remember we were like, where's it going to end? Are you going to start advertising alcohol? And like, this is sort of what we were worried about happening when we didn't want commercials to enter public schools. We were like, is there going to be an incentive to start marketing harmful goods? And like, I don't really feel like it's a plus. You're not building young people up by introducing them to gambling. You could argue it won't hurt that many kids, but you're not like, I don't see how like you're like building a young person into like a stronger, more well person by like being like, hey buddy, why don't you try gambling? And while you're at it, like, here's a pack of smokes. I'm not saying smoke them, but like, here they are,
But the fact that it's sort of the fact that calculus happens, like, well, this won't hurt too many of our students, right? Like, even if that's the baseline, that's already problematic.
In a serious way.
Yeah.
I don't know. Let's do auctions for seats in popular classes. Let's put a market in, for those Econ 101 seats, or those bio, those Gen Chem.
Doesn't that exist already? Isn't there like a service where I saw this at some like very large university, actually might have been a university in Canada where, or maybe a startup, but regardless, being able to trade your seat for someone who is in a particular huge 101 class, you pay them an amount and and then you sort of swap with them. And these are sort of students who don't necessarily need it, who whatever are seniors who just happen to be entrepreneurial to enroll in these classes, knowing that they could sell off their seat.
God,
this is dystopian.
Well, especially because like it's always the strong students who are enrolled like 8 months before, and it's always the weakest, most disorganized students who are looking to be over tallied into your class like 4 days before class begins. And you could just see like the students doing great. It's just going to be economic rents that they're going to be taking from the disorganized.
This is like a seat default swap thing. What if there's like a market on top of a market on top of, I mean, I'm not an expert on this kind of stuff, but it just, the financialization of so many aspects of kind of daily life. I was just reading an article about Starbucks, and Starbucks, they make it so easy to have like a balance on your Starbucks card and that you automatically reload. So Starbucks has like so many billions of dollars they're just sitting on because people want to have, $30, $40, $50 or whatever. And I'm one of these people, and they're on their card at all times.
Oh my God.
It's incredibly convenient. But basically you either become a bank or you sell real products. Like those are the two options.
One day you're going to read that Starbucks lost 100 billion in crypto, and now your coffee money's no good.
I mean, I wonder if there's like
that they can then borrow against, right? So
yeah, right.
You can finance building up more Starbucks stores because you have so many billions of dollars of people's money in your accounts, right?
Oh yeah.
Why wouldn't you?
Credit is crazy, like in
Really
America. Can I indulge in just a super quick story about it? So
Please do.
before I went to graduate school, I worked in Canada. I think I was making like 35, 40 grand a year as like a researcher for a marketing company. And I remember I had a credit card with like a $2,000 limit, and I asked the bank to raise it because I wanted to buy a plane ticket to somewhere. I don't know what it was, but whatever it is, I asked for more than 2,000. And they wrote back to me and they're like, no, Mr. Cohen, we think for someone earning like 35 grand a year, a $2,000 credit limit is all you need. And they said no. And then I went to graduate school at Princeton. Like 2 weeks of being here, they gave me a $15,000 credit limit card. I was just amazed. I was like, wow. Like, and that was a lot of money. That was like my entire annual salary at that point. Man, credit flows freely here. I don't know, for better or for worse. All right. Well, hey, it looks like we got one person in the chat. Anything to add? Whoever's in the chat, trying to see if we can use this chat window. Oh, I guess there's
one final thing on this college and gambling. I mean, this is like, it really is like handing people packs of cigarettes or giving away, liters of vodka for your first years. And just saying, most people aren't going to be addicted to alcohol, so I'll sign them up for an addiction to like some kind of beer delivery service. And I went to Missouri, so let me just tell you, many people don't need a beer delivery service.
For me, it's like, I see the kids who come into my school as young people, like they're kids, they're 18, 20, 22, whatever. They're very young. And like, I always think of my job as like somebody to edify them, to put them in a good direction, to help them out, to be someone who like 5-10 years later, they're like, man, I'm glad I ran into that dude. I'm glad this state made that dude available to me. And this runs completely opposite to the type of ethic that I bring to work. It's like using your kids as like a potential profit center by giving them stuff that might be bad for them. And it's just, I just wouldn't want to send my own children to a school like that for fear that like what would they do that would benefit them against my kids' interest.
It also goes to it also goes to like the idea of like what is higher education, what is sort of the idea of university, right? The idea of just having a sports league as part of university is such a unique American thing, right? You don't necessarily see that in other countries. I can't speak to Canada, but I don't think it's necessarily as prevalent. But the fact that we've sort of, I always think of Charlie Eaton's work and sort of the idea that at least elite universities are just hedge funds with classrooms attached for show, right? And I'm wondering if there's sort of this isomorphic kind of story where you think of these other universities that have sort of adopted that ethos, that we need to kind of get ahead of these things, considering that we are, especially many of these universities, I'm assuming are public universities where tuition money is strapped and state legislatures are increasingly stingy. Just trying to figure out how we can get more bang for the buck in any way possible, right? So, it's interesting that sort of this like neoliberal mentality has sort of manifested all these little these side hustles that they're sort of just completely just oblivious to sort of these other ethical issues.
It's like the ASA in a way, it's like, I get that there are a lot of organizations, nominally nonprofit public service, that are facing financial pressures, but rather than like scale down their operations, like that's the big problem, I guess, is I bet there are a lot of organizations that are going to have to scale down, and they're going to try to milk the customers before they, scale down. Maybe that's
are you saying that ASA is going to start sending promo codes into betting apps?
Show and put it past them, right?
ASA 2023, and you'll get a discount.
Well, when they
premium seat assignments at the plenaries,
right,
auctioning off seats at the banquets with sociological stars. But here's what I wanted to say. Charlie, you took my point about austerity and public expenditures. The reason why these things are thinkable is, especially in public institutions, both tightening fiscal budgets, obviously pandemic, but also 2008, and just, a series now of over a decade of financial austerity at the very least, if not, farther back. Like basically when universities started opening their doors to people other than white men at great numbers, you see the beginning of the end in terms of per student like expenditures, right? And secondly, I mean, and at least as importantly, what the duty to care, right? I think that's why I hear you saying, Joe, like, colleges and universities have a duty to care for their students. This is not a market commodity like bubblegum. It's not. We're not forming, consumers in the basest kind of sense. At least on our best days, we're not doing that, and we shouldn't be doing that, right?
Yeah.
Because the stakes of an educated citizenry go far beyond, what kind of toothbrush you're going to buy, or
but
any other consumer kind of product, right? And to me, like, that's the fundamental betrayal here, is betraying the duty to care, not only for the individual, but also for the overall project of higher education. And I know that's lofty, and I'm so being romantic, but that's where I'm at on this.
Well, it's also like, if I'm a taxpayer in Michigan and I know Michigan State is pushing gambling on their kids, then why do I want to channel more public money to them? It's clearly not like a, societal good at all costs type of agency. I'm sure I could, put that money in the hands of somebody a little more civically minded who might be able to deliver some good. Like, that's the problem, to my mind. There's behaving like this gives me less desire to want to, invest public funds in those schools.
Let me raise one more thing. The Chronicle of Higher Education just had an article about the coming demographic cliff for traditionally aged college students, and their case was essentially Shippensburg University of Pennsylvania. Now, the Pennsylvania State higher education system has these problems in terms of widespread austerity. I think there are like over 25 public universities in the state of Pennsylvania. And, Pennsylvania is a populous state. There's Philadelphia, there's Pittsburgh, and then there's a bunch of space in the middle. And some people too, and State College, of course, also sort of towards the center of the state. But you've got places that went from like 8,500 students to 5,300 students.
Yeah.
I think that was Shippensburg, or maybe another public university in the state. I'm forgetting the exact details, but you can see how you mentioned, retraction or diminution of services. That is probably going to happen, and it's probably going to happen more rapidly, according to this article and other studies. In the Northeast, we had 2 or 3 closures of colleges, private colleges in Vermont, Marlborough, right, and Green Mountain, maybe.
Yeah.
And so, folks who are in places like, Texas are a little bit better positioned demographically. Places, in the Southwest are a little bit better. California is a little bit better. But if you look at the dispersion of colleges, and especially private ones, there are lots more in the Northeast, and we're facing some real challenges, unless, of course, we think more creatively about what our markets are, and really making that lifelong learning thing that people talk about a reality. Otherwise, we're going to face, I think, a spate of closures. I don't know how big it's going to be. I don't think Penn State's going away. And this is another problem, right? The more elite places are going to be insulated, and the less elite places in more rural areas, and like I said, the rural Northeast especially, are going to have increasingly difficult times. I'm a little concerned for places like Abilene Christian, which is not in a super major metropolitan area, and has had pretty decent, stable enrollment, but not tons of growth over the past 10 years or so.
I don't think anybody's growing. Most people aren't growing. No. All right. Well, I think that about does it. I feel like that went quite well. I mean, I guess I probably should have waited till after the live stream to say that, but all right. Well, hold on. Let's sign off and then we'll chat. So thank you very much for listening to The Annex. The Annex is a production of the Queen's Podcast Lab. For more information, visit queenspodcastlab.org. Daniel Morrison, thank you, sir. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Joe.
Charles J. Gomez, always a pleasure.
Likewise. Thanks so much.
All right. Join us next week. We're going to have Lisa Hayar. We're going to talk about peace, conflict, human rights. You don't want to miss it. Bye for now.